Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join me today to learn more about exemptions to the ELD mandate. My name is Alex, and I'll be running the webinar. The ELD mandate was announced back in December of 2015 and finalized in February of 2016. Now we're just 4 months away from the implementation deadline, and it's crunch time in terms of finding a solution that meets your needs and keeps you compliant. We've been getting a lot of questions from customers about exemptions to the ELD mandate, because everyone wants to make sure that they have to comply before purchasing a DashLink ELD. During today's webinar, I'll explain each exemption, who is impacted by it, and answer some common exemption questions that we get frequently from customers. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. We'll be recording today's webinar and posting the video on the BigRoad blog. You can visit our blog at blog.bigroad.com. You'll find recaps here of all of our previous webinars, as well as information on what's happening in the industry, including new rules, regulation changes, and ELD mandate news. We post new content here at least twice a week. It's a great source of industry news and an easy way to keep yourself up to date. Tomorrow you'll be sent a follow-up email with a link to the recording and answers to the questions that were asked. Please feel free to share this with anyone who might have questions about the ELD mandate. Okay, let's get started. Here's what we'll cover in today's webinar. First, we'll briefly discuss the ELD mandate itself and why it's being implemented. I'm going to talk about ELDs and AOBRDs. Then we'll discuss each exemption in detail, who is impacted by each exemption. I'm going to cover some of the answers to common questions that we get about the ELD mandate exemptions. And finally, we'll discuss BigRoad's solution to the ELD mandate. Then we're going to end the webinar by answering questions that were submitted before and during the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, the ELD mandate was announced in December 2015 and finalized in February of 2016. ELDs are being mandated in order to better enforce and keep track of hours of service regulations while preventing fatigue driving, ultimately making the roads a safer place for everyone. The first deadline for compliance is December 18th of 2017. At this time, all non-exempt commercial motor vehicle drivers will need to have an AOBRD or ELD installed in their vehicle. By December 16th, 2019, so 2 years later, everyone who is non-exempt will have to have a fully compliant ELD installed in their vehicle. At this point, you are no longer allowed to use an AOBRD, only an ELD. If you've got BigRoad's DashLink in your vehicle now, this change to full compliance in December 2019 will just involve a simple software update in order to turn on ELD functionality. So for you, the switch to compliance will be super easy. Something to consider when you're planning your transition is whether you want to run an AOBRD or an ELD. There are a lot of similarities in the way that ELDs and AOBRDs operate, and both can keep you running in compliance with the ELD mandate. As part of the mandate, AOBRDs have been grandfathered in and can be used for 2 years after the ELD deadline. This means that if you have an AOBRD, like DashLink, installed before December 18th, 2017, you can continue to use it as an AOBRD until December 16th, 2019. After that, you will need to transition to full ELD mandate compliance. So why would you want to use an AOBRD until December 2019? Well, because they offer a lot more flexibility than ELDs do. You can edit information much more easily, and your edits aren't displayed to a DOT officer during an inspection. AOBRDs are a great way to get used to engine-connected logging so that you can switch to an ELD when you're ready. Our BigRoad DashLink is currently running as an AOBRD. If you have our DashLink, you just perform a software update in 2019, and you're running fully ELD mandate compliant. It's that easy. No new hardware, no need to swap out equipment. We'll be in touch with customers with more details about how to do this closer to the date. We recommend that you guys seriously consider this route. It makes transitioning a much more smooth process, especially when dealing with less tech-savvy drivers or drivers that are resistant to change. Although most CMV drivers will be required to run an AOBRD or ELD by December 18th, 2017, there are some exemptions to the ELD mandate, and we'll go over those now. These exemptions are very specific, so it's important to understand exactly who can use them and who can't in order to avoid significant fines. Be absolutely sure that you qualify for an exemption before assuming you do. Okay, let's dive into a detailed description of these exemptions. The first exemption is pretty straightforward. It's for drivers who aren't currently required to keep a record of duty status. They won't need to run an ELD. A good example of this are short-haul drivers. No ELD will be required for typical driving. However, as soon as you run outside of the short-haul classification, you will need an ELD. You'll definitely know if you qualify for this exemption, so it shouldn't cause too much confusion. The next exemption is the 8 and 30-day rule. It's a little bit more confusing. This is for drivers who are required to keep a record of duty status for no more than 8 days in a 30-day period. The important thing to remember here is that this is a rolling window of 30 consecutive days, not a 1-month calendar period. So before deciding that you're exempt here, you'll need to make sure that you never go over that 8 days in a moving 30-day period, because as soon as you do, you will need an ELD. For example, if you only drive from August 1st to 6th, so 6 days in a row, and then not again for another 30 days, you won't need to run an ELD because you've only driven 6 days in a 30-day window. However, let's say you drive from July 30th to August 10th, so 12 days in a row, you will need to run an ELD. This is because your drive time is over 8 days in a rolling 30-day period, even though it ran over 2 months. We sometimes recommend that drivers who qualify for this exemption get an ELD anyway, just to be safe. That way, if for some reason you do need to drive for more than 8 days in a 30-day period, you're covered and can keep driving with your ELD starting on that 9th day. Otherwise, you literally wouldn't be able to drive for that 9th day, which would end up costing you money. Next is the Driveaway-towaway operations exemption. This exemption will impact you if you're a driver who conducts driveaway-towaway operations and the CMV that you're driving is part of the freight, so it's empty and for sale, lease, or repair. In these cases, you aren't required to use an ELD. But the second part of this exemption is when the vehicle being transported is a motorhome or a recreation vehicle trailer with one or more sets of wheels on the surface of the roadway. The reason for this exemption is that these drivers typically don't know what make or model of vehicle they'll be transporting. This makes it next to impossible for them to have the right pin configuration cord connector to run an ELD. This has always been an exemption, but was recently updated by the FMCSA to provide some more clarification around the required specs. If you're driving a CMV that was manufactured before the year 2000, so 1999 or older, you won't need an ELD. This rule applies to the year of the engine within the CMV and not the body. So for example, if you're driving a truck with a 2017 body and a 2001 motor, you do need to run an ELD. However, if you're driving a truck with a 2017 body and a 1996 motor, you do not need to run an ELD. This exemption exists because the technology and connections aren't compatible with older engines, and it will be too difficult and costly for the FMCSA to expect drivers to comply. Finally, the 100 or 150 air mile exemptions. These sometimes cause confusion for drivers because the regulations are very specific. Let's start by talking about what an air mile is. An air mile is the distance in a straight line between 2 points. It's the same line, for example, that a plane would take. So if your headquarters are located at point A, an air mile is the distance you would travel in a straight line to your destination, point B. The 100 air mile exemption is for CDL drivers who operate within 100 air miles of their daily starting location, go off duty within 12 hours, report back to the same work location every day, and have at least 10 consecutive hours off before starting their next on-duty period. The 150 air mile exemption is for non-CDL commercial drivers who operate within a 150 air mile radius, do not drive through any state that requires a CDL for the type of vehicle being driven, report back to the same work location every day, and do not drive after the 14 hour of coming on duty in a period of 7 consecutive days. This is another one of these exemptions where we recommend that you get an ELD anyway, just to be safe. This way, if for some reason you do have to drive for more than 100 or 150 air mile radius from your starting location, you're covered and can keep driving with your ELD. Otherwise, again, you literally wouldn't be able to drive for that extra distance, which would cost you money. So that covers all the exemptions to the ELD mandate. I'm going to now cover some common questions about exemptions that we've been getting from a lot of customers. So first one, does fleet size impact whether we need ELDs or not? What if I have a fleet of under 5 trucks? There is no fleet size limitation. Owner-operators and small fleets do need to comply with the ELD mandate unless they qualify for an exemption. If you have a fleet of 5 trucks or less and they don't qualify for an exemption, you will need to ensure that they're all running ELDs. Next one, what if I'm driving a glider kit? So a glider kit is a truck where the body is newer and the engine is older. The FMCSA recently changed this exemption. Now, trucks with a model year 1999 engine and older will not be subject to the ELD mandate, regardless of the model year of their truck. Next, are there separate rules and regulations for Canadian drivers that drive US trucks? If you're a Canadian driver and driving a US truck in the US, you have to comply with US rules, so you will need an ELD. If you're a Canadian driver and driving a US truck in Canada, you have to comply with Canadian rules. So it's based on which country you're driving in rather than which country the truck is registered in. As soon as you cross the border, you have to comply with that country's rules. The majority of cross-border drivers are adopting ELDs just to be safe and make the logging process less complicated. The next one, what should I do if I'm occasionally exempt? If you're occasionally exempt, you'll still need to have an ELD in your truck for those instances when you're driving and not exempt. It's better to be safe than sorry. You want to ensure that you're always covered and not driving in violation of the mandate. For example, let's say you typically qualify for the 100 air mile radius exemption, but today you're driving outside of that. You'll want to have an ELD available that you can use for this day. BigRoad is awesome because you can use the mobile app most of the time to track your hours of service and have our DashLink ELD handy to plug in when you need to use an ELD. Next question, what should I do if my fleet is partially exempt? This answer is very similar to the one we just answered. If your fleet is partially exempt, all drivers who are exempt will not require an ELD, but all other drivers will need one. BigRoad is also great for situations like this because your exempt drivers can use the BigRoad mobile app to track their hours of service, and your non-exempt drivers can use both the BigRoad mobile app as well as the DashLink ELD. Because DashLink is so easy to install, you just plug it into the ECM of your vehicle, it's very easy to move it between trucks if your exempt and non-exempt drivers ever switch rigs. BigRoad is the solution of choice for fleets and drivers in this situation. The solution that I'd recommend you guys look into if you need a compliance solution is our DashLink. With the electronic logging device mandate getting closer, customers are starting to make the move, not only because they need to comply, but because they've seen how engine-connected logging can improve their operations. Our DashLink is the easiest and most affordable ELD mandate compliance solution that you're going to find on the market today. Plus, because you're already familiar with our mobile and web app, the transition to a DashLink will be really easy because there's no need to learn new software. It's also very easy to install. You just plug the DashLink device into the ECM of your truck, pair it with your BigRoad mobile app via Bluetooth, and you're ready to go. There's no expensive installation or permanent changes to your truck. The device pulls the information directly from the computer within the truck, so you can focus on driving and not logging. And as we covered, you can run DashLink as an AOBRD until 2019. If before that you want to go fully ELD, you can with a flick of a switch. So you control when you transition from AOBRD to ELD. Before we end the webinar, I want to quickly talk about BigRoad's new referral program. Many of our customers already refer their friends to BigRoad, but this program gives you guys a chance to get paid for doing so. If a friend that you referred purchases BigRoad's DashLink ELD, you get a $75 reward and they get a $25 reward. And these rewards include things like prepaid MasterCards. To learn more and to sign up to participate, check out bigroad.com/rewards. The URL is just right in the middle of the screen there. I'll just give you a minute to write it down if you need to. So that wraps up our webinar, ELD Mandate and I Exempt. If you have any questions that weren't answered during the webinar, please enter them into the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. While we're waiting for those to come in, a couple of things you can take advantage of. If you're interested in learning more about BigRoad solutions, please feel free to reach out to your account manager because they'll be happy to help you out. Now let's dive into some of the questions that came up. Carmen asks, does the ELD mandate apply to Canadian companies? Currently, the Canadian government has written up their proposed ELD mandate and provided it to stakeholders like BigRoad for review. It looks like the implementation deadline will be the end of 2017. However, no formal timeline has been approved. It's worth noting that the Canadian government has said they will follow a similar implementation timeline and exemption rules as the US has. We'll keep you updated on the status of the Canadian ELD mandate on our BigRoad blog, social media channels, and monthly newsletter. It's important to note that if you're a Canadian driver who will be driving in the US, you do need an ELD for when you're driving in the US, because you'll have to comply with all US rules, including the ELD mandate. Bill asks, I'm a hotshot owner-operator. I only have one truck and a 140-foot gooseneck trailer. Do I have to use an ELD? So Bill, I hope this webinar helped to answer your question. If you don't qualify for one of the exemptions that we mentioned during the webinar, you will need to use an ELD. Sheila asks, if a driver goes into a substitute trailer, can he or she take their ELD from their permanent trailer to use? So yes, you can take your ELD into another truck with you. With BigRoad, you can easily add a new truck to the mobile app and then move the DashLink over to the other truck. Because DashLink just plugs into the ECM of your vehicle, it's really easy to move it. You can unplug it from one truck and move it to another, and then switch trucks on the BigRoad mobile app so it knows which one you're in. You'll just need to make sure that you have the right connector cord and pin type for the other vehicle. Greg, Bill, Russell, and Eric all have similar questions. My truck is a glider kit with a 2012 body and 1999 engine. Do I need an ELD? So one exemption is for trucks with engines that are 1999 and older. Under the ELD mandate, you qualify for this exemption if your engine was manufactured in 1999 or earlier, meaning that you don't need to install an ELD in your truck. Ruth asks, under the 8 days in 30 ELD exemption, must the 8 days of paper logs be consecutive? May a driver use BigRoad to record off-duty logs to supplement his paper logs? So no, these 8 days just have to be 8 days in a rolling 30-day period. They don't have to be consecutive. If the driver goes over these 8 days, they will need to use an ELD. If they're keeping paper logs for the time they're exempt, you can definitely do this on BigRoad, just using the electronic logbook, so the BigRoad mobile app, and not the ELD. Candy asks, we deliver petroleum products. Are we exempt? At this point, there are no exemptions for petroleum carriers, meaning that you will need ELDs unless you qualify for one of the other exemptions. Adam asks, if I'm just using the BigRoad mobile app, does that qualify for the exemption, or do I need the DashLink plug-and-play device in order to qualify? So the BigRoad mobile app is an e-log, which basically replaces paper logs. Although this makes daily logging easier for you, it's not ELD compliant alone. The ELD mandate requires that you use an engine-connected device, and the BigRoad mobile app is not. In order to be compliant, you will need our DashLink ELD, which is an engine-connected device certified by the FMCSA. The benefit of getting our DashLink is that there's basically no learning curve for you. You're already familiar with the BigRoad mobile app, and DashLink integrates seamlessly with it. Jacques asks, we have many drivers that occasionally go into the US. What are the ELD requirements for them? Does DashLink need to be plugged in the entire time or just when they cross the border? So as soon as they enter the US, they need to comply with the US rules, meaning they need to comply with the ELD mandate. When they're driving in Canada, they don't need to run an ELD. They only have to track their hours using an electronic logbook or paper logs. Doing this means you probably will have 2 systems up and running. This is why we recommend running an ELD both in the US and Canada, but it's obviously up to you. So that concludes our webinar. Thank you all so much for attending. You're going to notice a short survey pop up at the end of the webinar, and please take a minute to fill it out so we can make our next one even better. Thanks.